Okay, hi folks. Um, so Charlie's going to be in the video today. Um, I thought she might have stayed there with little ears poking up for the whole video, but apparently she's going to sit right behind me. All right, so in today's video, what we're going to be talking about is different reading strategies, the way that novice and emerging and expert readers use them, and different strategies that you can use to help you find information quickly in and about the sources that you're using. So we will tackle these one at a time. We're basically proceeding now from the assumption that you've downloaded a whole bunch of PDFs and you're in the now what stage of your research. Like, okay, I've covered my desktop in PDFs. They all have a shared topical focus, but now what you need to do is think about your goals as a writer and how it is you're likely to use these sources to help you find the information you need to continue with your writing projects. So let's start by talking about how to read. You do already have a pretty good intuitive grasp of how to read like a researcher. You already know what you're doing. My goal here is to validate those strategies for you, to explain to you that these are actually really good strategies, give you a language to use to justify them, and help you understand the place of your different reading strategies in your research process. So, the first strategy I want to talk about is what's called previewing. Previewing is basically your first step. It's what you do when you're trying to figure out whether you should go any further with these sources or whether you should just immediately delete them. So, when you preview a source, basically all you need to do is read the abstract, read the subheadings, and look at any figures. So, what we're talking about there are things like charts or tables. You're trying to extract a high level overview of what this source is about so that you can decide whether you need to go further with it and spend a little bit more time to figure out the details of what's happening in there. So that's your first step. Go through, preview your sources, delete everything that you don't need, really delete it. If you just put it in a folder to read later, you'll wind up like me with like many thousands of things in a folder called to read, which you will never actually read. Just delete it. So after you've previewed and you've narrowed it down to a smaller set of articles that you think you want to read, your next step is to either skim or scan the work. Which one of these you do is going to depend on your goal, so what kinds of information you're looking for. If you're trying to get a sense of what is happening in an article, what argument it's making, what are the key ideas, what evidence they have, you're going to want to do skimming. So, skimming means that you're taking advantage of genre specific structures to identify key points. So, for example, you've already looked at the abstract and the subheadings when you previewed the source, but every essay in every discipline has its own specific generic features. So, for example, in a science report, you know that all the results and discussion are going to be at the end. And so you can skip directly through to that to look for where those key points are. If you're looking for how someone did something, you know the methodology is going to be in the first half of the paper. So you can spend your time there. So basically, what you're looking for is places where you know key information is going to be based on your understanding of the genre. This could mean in specific sections. This could mean particular places in paragraphs. For example, you might just read the topic sentences in an essay to get the high points. So skimming is what you do when you want to know what's in the article, but you don't want to read the whole thing. Scanning is what you do when you are looking for specific information. So you might be looking for specific information about a particular person, a particular event, or a particular date. And you want to just extract whatever is in the article that relates to that idea. The easiest way to do this is just to search for it in the file, so Command F, and then type in your key search words, and then you can just tab through it and see where that thing is mentioned. If you're working with a print source, you kind of need to sort of unfocus your eyes and just zoom over it and look for the shapes of words. So scanning is looking for specific information. And both of those are strategies that you can use to help you get a big picture overview of what's happening in an article. The very last type of reading, and this is the one you're going to do the least often, is actually reading or studying a source. Um, a lot of people think that they need to read something closely in order to use it in an essay and in order to respond to it in your tutorials. Realistically, you're going to do this for a very small minority of the sources that you use. You're probably going to do it for maybe one piece of reading each week in your classes, the one that you are really interested in, that responds to your goals, the one that you want to talk about in tutorials. And you'll do it for a handful of sources for your individual research projects in any given class. So when you're reading or studying, you need to start at the top, read the whole way through to the bottom, slow down, take your time, tick back over things that you need to, take notes. And the goal of reading closely is basically to extract everything that's in there. You want to do it slowly so that you can think about the material as you're doing it. So when you're reading, you don't want to just be understanding what the author says, but you want to be making connections in your own head to your goals as a writer and thinking about how the information you're gathering is going to connect into the assignments that you're doing. And this is what Horler is talking about in the Walk, Talk, Cook, Eat reading. You need to be thinking about your goals as a reader. The other aspect of reading that I want to talk about is not about the concrete practices of reading, but rather about your mindset while you're doing it. Um, so when you open any given source, you're always going to come to it with a particular mindset. You're going to be thinking about it in a particular way. And these different stances can be really effective in helping you to gain different perspectives on a piece of writing. So I've listed off 5 different reading stances here. Hostile reading, skeptical reading, neutral reading, generous reading, and sympathetic reading. We have neutral in the middle, and I'll tell you now that that's not a real thing. It's kind of an imagined ideal that we can just pick up a source and just encounter it without bringing any of ourselves to it. In reality, whenever we look at a source, we're bringing our own preconceptions to it. We're thinking about what we can get out of it and how we might use it. So neutral reading is an imagined ideal. Our other reading stances here, though, can help us to get different things out of a source. So when you read something in a hostile manner, you hate read it, or position yourself as an antagonist or a combatant, trying to pick holes in a source. Hostile reading can really help you to identify weaknesses in a source um, and to help you think about the ways that you might attack it depending on your goals as a writer. When you come into a text with a skeptical reading stance, so things like, we will see how this goes. When you come in skeptically, you are basically challenging the writer to change your mind. It opens you up to persuasion, but it makes it a little bit hard. Like it's harder work for the writer to convince you. When you encounter a text generously, you're basically opening yourself up to it. You're saying, I'm here, I'm ready to listen, I'm ready to learn from you. This is a really open reading stance. It positions you well to get the most out of a piece of writing. And the final one that we have listed here is sympathetic reading. So generally people come into these sources when they already are on the side of the writer. They already believe that the writer's stance is true, or as a friend or whatever. The risk with sympathetic reading is that it can make it easy for you to miss problems with a source, to choose to overlook stuff. And it can make it hard for you to identify any weaknesses in the piece. So all of these different reading stances have, different advantages and disadvantages. It's probably not necessary for you as first year writers, but if you're moving towards larger independent research projects, if you're in, your second or third or fourth year of study, you're thinking about honours or postgraduate work. One thing that I would really recommend for sources that you're going to spend a lot of time with or really rely on is to think consciously about your reading stance and maybe try reading something twice, coming to it with different positions both times. So come into it thinking as a generous reader, saying, I'm here, I want to learn from you. And then take another pass, imagining yourself as an antagonist, someone who's going to argue with this writer, and look for the weaknesses in it. When you approach a text using these multiple reading stances, it gives you a much more well-rounded picture. And again, I would say, this is for sources that you are really going to rely on in larger projects. All right, so this is a big picture of how to read. But we can also talk about different reading strategies that you can use to help you assess sources. So, my favorite tool for thinking about how to figure out whether a source is trustworthy or not comes from Mike Caulfield, who's the director of blended and networked learning at Washington State University in Vancouver. Um, and he studies how digital information and disinformation affects democracy. And has developed a reading and research strategy called Reading Like a Fact Checker, or the SIFT model, which helps students learn how to vet claims that are circulating online. So Caulfield's model responds to basically the problem that a lot of expert readers are not that good at assessing sources, and especially web-based sources. Um, we have a lot of misinformation circulating online, as you all know. You're probably sick of hearing about it. One of the things we know is that especially expert researchers are super gullible and believe a lot of what they read on the internet. So Caulfield has come up with a new model for teaching people how to assess the credibility of different sources. Basically asking them to read laterally, track back to the source, and look at the evidence. And we'll be working on this a bit in tutorials. So one of the things that researchers have done around this model is to think about how people read sources. And in a 2017 study, two researchers invited a group of professional fact checkers, a group of expert historians, and a group of undergraduate history students to assess two competing sites which were presenting scholarly arguments but had different levels of credibility. They picked historians because historians, in particular, are meant to be experts at working with sources. Their entire job is reading and assessing the credibility of documents. So what they found was that there was a real difference. What these researchers found was that there was a real difference between the way that historians, both experts and undergraduates, read these texts and the way that fact checkers read these texts. They found that historians and undergraduate historians first tried to assess the web interface. They were looking for whether the site had a logo, an association logo, whether it was a .com or a .edu domain. They looked at genre features. So does this piece have an abstract? Does this piece include references? And they looked at the author's credentials, so the claims of expertise that the source made. And the fact checkers assessed the larger landscape. They opened up this web page and immediately opened a new tab and started looking up the authors and the organizations. They searched for information about who had written it. They searched for other things that people had written about this topic, and then they went back to the source to try and figure out what it was. So what they found was that faced with these two competing sites, one by the American Academy of Pediatrics and one by the American College of Pediatrics, similar names, very different organizations, what they found was that the fact checkers were incredibly good at figuring out that the Academy was a legitimate source, whereas the expert historians were not awesome at it. About half of them did figure out that the Academy was the legit site. 10% of them got it wrong, and 40% of the historians were like, I don't know, I don't want to say, it's too confusing. So they really sort of hedged their bets. So they were more willing to admit that they were unsure. Students read differently. What they found was that students were more likely to be certain than their expert historian co-participants in this survey. But the majority of them saw the references, saw the abstract, saw the credentials of the author, and said, oh, yes, the College of Pediatrics is the legitimate site. We have relatively small groups on either side who selected the academy or were a bit unsure. So what we can see is that those strategies of just looking at the source really don't work in helping us understand whether something's credible or not. Instead, what we need to do is follow Caulfield's 4 moves. First, to check for previous work. So has somebody else already written about this topic? Has somebody else already investigated whether this source is legitimate or not? The second move is to go upstream, find the original claim that's being reported. So this might mean checking references in an academic article, or it may mean going from a newspaper article back to the academic source that it's reporting on. You should read laterally. What this means is that you want to investigate what other people are saying about the source, what they're saying about the venue, what they're saying about the author. Are these legitimate people, and are these legitimate sites that we're looking at? And if you get stuck at any point, you just circle back to the beginning. So, through this process of checking, going upstream, and reading laterally, you've developed an improved understanding of the source, and you can then do better searching the next time around. So just to wrap up, when you read like a researcher, what you're going to be doing is using a variety of reading strategies and assuming a variety of different reading stances. And which ones you choose are going to depend on your goal. So what it is that you're trying to do with the source and how it is that you imagine it fitting into your work. When you read the same text in multiple ways, you understand it better. You extract more information as you move from previewing to skimming or scanning to reading. And you understand more about the source when you approach it with multiple reading stances. So if you read it first generously and then hostilely. Finally, a reminder that it is very, very normal for you to preview a lot, skim a smaller chunk, and read a very, very narrow slice of what you actually locate through your research sources. And this is characteristic of the kind of reading that expert researchers and writers do.